The morning sun was just beginning to rise over New Haven Station when the Zenthari shuttle touched down on landing pad 7. Security guards stood at attention, their uniforms pressed and neat. They had been briefed about the visitor. He was important. Very important. Ambassador Kreshatar emerged from the shuttle, and the guards tried not to stare. They had seen aliens before, but never one quite like this. He stood 12 feet tall, maybe more. His body was covered in scales that shimmered and changed colors in the light, moving from deep blue to purple to green. His eyes were golden, with vertical slits like a cat. When he breathed, small wisps of what looked like steam came from his nostrils. The Zenthari were called dragons by most of the galaxy, and looking at Kreshatar, it was easy to see why. His people could fly through space without ships. They could survive in the vacuum between stars. They could travel from planet to planet using only their own bodies. For thousands of years, they had been considered one of the most powerful species in known space. Ben Martinez waited at the bottom of the shuttle ramp. He was 28 years old, and this was his first major diplomatic assignment. He wore a simple gray suit and carried a data pad. When he saw the massive ambassador descending toward him, he felt his stomach tighten with nervousness. But he smiled anyway. His mother had always told him that a smile was the best way to start any conversation. "Welcome to New Haven, Ambassador Kreshatar," Ben said, extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. "I'm Ben Martinez. I'll be your liaison during your stay." Kreshatar looked at the small hand offered to him. His own hand could have wrapped around Ben's entire arm. Carefully, gently, he reached out and shook. "I am honored to be here," he said. His voice was deep, like rocks grinding together, but his translator made the words clear. Ben gestured toward the terminal building. "I have your schedule all prepared. The governor is looking forward to meeting you tomorrow. Tonight I've arranged accommodation at the Grand Hotel downtown. It has high ceilings, which I thought you might appreciate." "How will we travel there?" Kreshatar asked. He looked around the landing pad, expecting to see a private vehicle, perhaps an official car with flags and escorts. "We'll take the Hypertrain," Ben said cheerfully. "The next one leaves in 12 minutes. We should hurry if we want to catch it. The next one after that isn't for another 20 minutes. Kreshatar stopped walking. "The Hypertrain. What is this?" "Public transit," Ben explained, already moving toward the terminal. "It's a magnetic levitation train that runs on elevated rails throughout the city and connects to other cities across the continent. Fastest way to get anywhere. And during rush hour, which is right now, it's definitely the most reliable option. Traffic on the ground level is terrible this time of day." The ambassador followed Ben into the terminal, his head nearly brushing the ceiling. Around them, hundreds of humans rushed in every direction. People in business suits hurried past. Workers in dirty coveralls laughed and joked with each other. A group of school children in matching uniforms walked in a neat line behind their teacher. No one seemed to pay much attention to the 12-foot-tall dragon walking through their midst. A few people glanced over, nodded politely, and went back to their own business. This confused Kreshatar more than he wanted to admit. On most worlds, his arrival caused crowds to gather. People wanted to see a Zenthari, wanted to watch one of the space-flying dragons. But these humans barely looked up from their phones and data pads. Ben led him down a wide escalator to a lower level. The sound grew louder here. There was the hum of voices, hundreds of conversations happening at once. There was the clicking of shoes on tile floors. There was an automated voice announcing train arrivals and departures. They reached the platform just as a sleek silver train glided to a stop. It moved so smoothly that Kreshatar barely noticed it arriving until it was there. The doors slid open with a soft hiss. "Come on," Ben said, stepping inside. "Quick, before it gets too crowded." Kreshatar ducked to fit through the door. Inside, the train car was already half full. People sat on benches along the walls. Others stood, holding onto rails and straps that hung from the ceiling. Ben grabbed one of the overhead handles and motioned for Kreshatar to do the same. The ambassador had to bend slightly to fit. His massive frame took up the space of 3 humans. A woman in a nurse's uniform shifted her bag to make room for him. An older man reading a newspaper glanced up, saw the alien, and went back to his reading without comment. The doors closed. A chime sounded. The train began to move. Kreshatar had flown through the void between stars. He had felt the pull of gravity wells and the push of solar winds. He had traveled at speeds that would tear most ships apart. But this was different. The train accelerated so smoothly that he barely felt the movement. Within seconds, they were racing through a tunnel carved beneath the city. Lights flickered past the windows. Next to him, a young man in a fast food uniform was listening to music through earbuds. Across from him, 2 teenage girls were giggling at something on a shared phone screen. Near the door, a businessman was taking a video call, discussing quarterly reports in a low voice. Ben checked his datapad. "About 15 minutes to downtown," he said casually. "Not bad for a Wednesday evening." "These people," Kreshatar said slowly, watching the crowd. "They do this every day?" "Most of them, yeah," Ben replied. "Some twice a day. Morning commute to work, evening commute back home. New Haven has about 8 million people. Maybe 3 million of them use the Hypertrain system regularly." Kreshatar tried to process this information. 3 million people, every day, sharing these metal tubes, racing through tunnels and over bridges and between buildings. The train emerged from the tunnel onto an elevated track. Through the windows, Kreshatar could see the city spreading out below. Buildings stretched toward the horizon. Streets formed neat grids. Cars and trucks moved along the roads, but from up here they looked slow, stuck in traffic that barely moved. The Hypertrain rushed past it all. A mother with a baby got on at the next stop. She looked tired. An elderly man immediately stood and offered her his seat. She smiled gratefully and sat down, adjusting the baby on her lap. The old man held onto a rail, swaying gently with the train's movement. No one thought this was special. No one acted like this was anything other than normal, everyday life. But to Kreshatar, who came from a species where each individual flew alone through space, where power and strength were measured by how far one could travel without help, this was something entirely new. This was something he did not yet understand. But he wanted to. The Hypertrain stopped at Central Plaza Station. The doors opened and dozens of people poured out. Just as many pushed their way in. Ben guided Kreshatar through the crowd, somehow making space for the massive alien ambassador. They ended up near the middle of the car this time, pressed in on all sides by humans. A woman with bright red hair stood to Kreshatar's left. She was reading something on her datapad, completely absorbed in whatever was on the screen. To his right, a man in a mechanic's jumpsuit smelled like oil and metal. The name patch on his chest said Gary, and he was eating some kind of wrapped sandwich, taking bites between stops. "Sorry about the squeeze," Ben said, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the general noise of the train. "The 6:15 train is always the worst. Everyone getting off work at the same time." Kreshatar said nothing. He was too busy observing. Every few seconds, someone's elbow bumped against his side. A young man's backpack hit his leg. The woman with red hair shifted her weight when the train turned, pressing closer to him accidentally. None of them seemed bothered by touching an alien. None of them seemed afraid. On Zenthar Prime, physical contact was rare. Zenthari were solitary by nature. They kept their distance from each other. Personal space was sacred. But here, in this metal tube racing through the city at 300 kilometers per hour, personal space did not exist. "Next stop, Market District," the automated voice announced. More people got off. More people got on. A group of construction workers entered the car, laughing about something that had happened on their job site. They wore hard hats, and carried lunch boxes. One of them, a large man with a thick beard, ended up standing near Kreshatar. The man looked up at the ambassador and whistled low. "Damn! You're a big one," he said, not unkindly. "How tall are you, if you don't mind me asking?" 12 feet and 4 inches, Kreshatar replied, surprised by the casual question. "Must be hell finding pants that fit," the man said with a grin. His friends laughed. "I'm 6'8" and I have trouble. Can't imagine being your height." "My people do not wear pants," Kreshatar said seriously. This made the construction workers laugh harder. Even Ben smiled. The bearded man slapped his knee. Fair enough, fair enough. I'm Danny, by the way. Danny Kowalski." He did not offer to shake hands, probably because both his hands were full with his hard hat and lunchbox. "I am Ambassador Kreshatar of the Zenthari Collective," Kreshatar replied formally. "An ambassador, huh? Fancy. You here for political stuff?" "Trade negotiations and cultural exchange," Kreshatar said. Danny nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Well, welcome to New Haven. If you need any recommendations for places to eat, let me know. My cousin runs a great pizza place on 5th Street. The train slowed again. "Market District, next stop, Financial Center," the automated voice said. Danny and his friends pushed toward the doors. "See you around, Ambassador," Danny called as he stepped off the train. "Good luck with the negotiations." Then they were gone, swallowed by the crowd on the platform. Kreshatar stared after them. "That man spoke to me as if we were equals," he said quietly to Ben. Ben looked confused. "Well, yeah. I mean, you are equals. He's a person. You're a person." "Why wouldn't he talk to you normally?" Before Kreshatar could answer, an elderly woman nearby spoke up. She had gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Don't mind Danny," she said with a smile. "He talks to everyone like that. Last week he spent 20 minutes chatting with the mayor about fishing. The man has no sense of formality." "You know him?" Ben asked. "Oh, everyone knows Danny. He takes this train every day, same time for 15 years now. Always cheerful, always friendly." She adjusted her purse on her lap. "I'm Helen Park, by the way, and you must be the Zenthari ambassador everyone's been talking about." "News of my arrival has spread?" Kreshatar asked. Helen shrugged. "Small article in the morning paper. Page 6, I think. Right next to the piece about the new recycling program." She looked up at him with genuine curiosity. "Is it true your people can fly through space without ships?" "Yes," Kreshatar said. "We are born with this ability. The void does not harm us. We navigate by sensing gravitational fields." "Fascinating," Helen said. "Must save a fortune on travel costs." The train emerged onto an outdoor elevated section. Sunlight poured through the windows. Kreshatar could see the city stretching out below, could see other Hypertrain lines crisscrossing through the urban landscape like silver threads in a vast web. Some trains ran above ground, some below, some at street level. All of them were full of people going somewhere. "How many of these trains exist?" Kreshatar asked Ben. "On New Haven?" "About 600 trains running at any given time across 12 different lines. The system moves about 5 million passengers a day." Ben checked his data pad. "We're actually one of the smaller systems. New Toronto moves almost 20 million people daily. 600 trains, 5 million passengers. The numbers felt impossible." "On my world," Kreshatar said slowly, "each person travels alone. We fly where we need to go. We arrive when we arrive. There is no schedule, no shared journey." Helen made a thoughtful sound. "Sounds lonely," she said simply. The word hit Kreshatar like a physical blow. Lonely. He had never thought of it that way before. The Zenthari prided themselves on their independence, their self-sufficiency. But was it lonely? Flying through the dark between stars with no one beside you, no conversation, no shared experience? "Financial Center. Next stop, University Campus, the automated voice announced. A student got on, a young woman with dark skin and hair pulled back in a ponytail. She carried a bag full of textbooks that looked heavy. She struggled to find space to stand, trying to balance the heavy bag. Without being asked, Gary the mechanic moved over slightly, making room. "Here, lean that bag against my leg," he offered. "No point in you holding it up the whole ride." The student smiled gratefully. "Thanks. Physics textbooks weigh a ton." "Tell me about it. My daughter's studying engineering. I keep telling her to get the digital versions, but she likes paper." Gary went back to eating his sandwich. The red-haired woman was still reading on her datapad. Helen had closed her eyes, maybe taking a short nap. The student pulled out her own phone and started scrolling through something. A businessman in an expensive suit stood near the door, talking quietly on a phone call about stock prices and market projections. All of them together. All of them sharing this space, this journey. The rich businessman and the mechanic. The elderly woman and the young student. The alien ambassador and the construction worker who had already gotten off. Kreshatar looked at Ben. "This happens every day? Twice a day?" "For most people, yeah," Ben confirmed. "Some people take the train 3 or 4 times a day if they have errands to run or meetings to attend. And they do not mind being so close to strangers?" Ben considered the question. "I guess we're used to it. It's just part of life in the city. You take the train, you deal with crowds. You accept that sometimes you'll be squeezed in next to someone you don't know. But that's okay. We're all just trying to get somewhere." He smiled. "Plus, you meet interesting people. I once had a 40-minute conversation with a woman who bred show dogs. Learned more about poodles than I ever thought I'd know." The train began to slow again. Through the windows, Kreshatar could see tall buildings of glass and steel rising up to meet them. This was the downtown area where the biggest companies had their offices, where the government buildings stood. "Grand Hotel, next stop," Ben said. "That's us." But Kreshatar found himself not wanting to leave. He wanted to stay on this train, to watch these people, to try to understand what it meant to travel together like this, to share space and time with others, even strangers, even aliens from distant stars. The train stopped. The doors opened. Ben stepped toward the exit. Kreshatar followed, but slowly, looking back at the remaining passengers. They barely noticed him leaving. They were already focused on their own destinations, their own thoughts, their own lives. The dragon who could fly through stars stepped off the Hypertrain and onto the platform, feeling something he had never felt before. He felt like he had just glimpsed something important, something his people had missed in all their thousands of years of solitary flight through the void. 3 weeks had passed since Kreshatar arrived on New Haven. He had attended formal dinners with government officials. He had toured factories and research facilities. He had given speeches about cooperation between humans and Zenthari. But every evening, he found himself returning to the Hypertrain. Ben had been surprised the first time Kreshatar asked to take the train instead of the official car. "Are you sure, Ambassador? We can arrange private transportation. You don't have to deal with the crowds." "I wish to take the train," Kreshatar had said firmly. So they took the train. And then they took it again the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the first week, Ben stopped asking and just led them to the nearest station whenever they needed to go somewhere. Kreshatar began to recognize people. The Hypertrain ran on schedules, which meant the same people rode at the same times every day. He saw Helen Park, the elderly woman, every evening on the 6:15 train. He saw Gary the mechanic most mornings around 7:30. And he saw Danny Kowalski almost every day at 5 in the morning on the earliest train that ran. That first early morning encounter had been accidental. Kreshatar could not sleep. His body clock had not adjusted to New Haven's 26-hour day. At 4:30 in the morning, he had left the hotel and walked to the nearest station, curious if the trains even ran this early. They did, and the train was not empty. About 30 people sat scattered throughout the car. Most of them looked tired. Some slept with their heads against the windows. Others drank coffee from travel mugs. The car was quiet, peaceful in a way the evening trains never were. Danny Kowalski sat near the back, eating what looked like a breakfast sandwich wrapped in foil. He looked up when Kreshitar entered, and his face broke into a grin. "Ambassador, you're up early." "Or couldn't sleep." "I could not sleep," Kreshitar admitted, moving to sit near Danny. The seats on the train were too small for him, so he usually stood. But this early in the morning, the car was empty enough that he could sit on the floor if he wanted. He did. "Yeah, jet lag is rough. Well, space lag in your case, I guess." Danny took another bite of his sandwich. "Want half? It's just eggs and sausage and cheese." Kreshitar had learned that humans often offered food as a gesture of friendship. "I cannot eat your food. Our biology is different, but I appreciate the offer." Danny nodded and kept eating. They rode in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Outside the windows, the city was still mostly dark. Streetlights created pools of orange glow on empty streets below. "Can I ask you something?" Danny said finally. "And if it's rude, just tell me to shut up." "You may ask." "Why do you keep taking the train? I mean, you're an ambassador. Important guy. Don't you have, like, a fancy car or something? With flags on it?" Kreshitar considered the question. He had been asking himself the same thing. "I am trying to understand," he said slowly. "My people travel alone. We always have. Each Zenthari flies through space by themselves. We never thought to travel together. But you humans have built this system where everyone travels together, rich and poor, young and old. I want to understand why." Danny wiped his hands on a napkin. "Huh? Never really thought about it that way. It's just how things are, you know. You need to get somewhere, you take the train. Cheaper than driving, faster than walking, easier than flying. But you share the space with strangers. Does this not bother you?" "Sometimes," Danny admitted. "When it's really crowded and some guy's armpit is in your face. Yeah, that's not great. But mostly it's fine. You get used to it. And sometimes it's nice. Like now, having someone to talk to at 5 in the morning. Makes the commute less boring." The train stopped at Industrial Park Station. A few more workers got on, carrying lunch boxes and thermoses. They nodded to Danny, who nodded back. One of them, a woman with paint-stained coveralls, sat down nearby and immediately closed her eyes to nap. "That's Maria Lopez," Danny said quietly. "She works night shift at the paint factory. Takes this train home every morning. She's got 3 kids. Her husband takes the 7 o'clock train to his job at the docks. They trade off, you know." "One parent is always home with the kids." "How do you know this?" Kreshitar asked. Danny shrugged. "We talk sometimes. You ride the same train with the same people for years, you get to know them. Not like friends exactly, but like neighbors. Train neighbors." The concept fascinated Kreshitar. Train neighbors. People you saw regularly, but only in this specific context. This shared journey from one place to another. Over the following weeks, Kreshitar met more of these train neighbors. There was Angela Torres, a nurse who worked 12-hour shifts at City Hospital. She rode the train in her scrubs, usually looking exhausted, but she always had a smile and a kind word for other passengers. There was old George Patterson, a retired teacher who rode the train every day, even though he did not have to work anymore. "I get restless at home," he explained to Kreshitar one afternoon. "So I ride the train, see the city, watch people. Keeps me feeling connected." There was Carla Bennett, a young woman who sold flowers from a cart near the financial district. She brought bundles of roses and lilies onto the train each morning, the flowers filling the car with sweet scents. Other passengers would sometimes buy flowers from her right there on the train, paying with digital transfers from their phones. "It's technically not allowed," Ben whispered to Kreshatar when he saw this happening, but the transit police looked the other way. Everyone likes Carla. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Kreshatar witnessed something that changed his understanding even more. The train was crowded, as always during rush hour. A young man in a business suit was standing near the door, looking at his phone with increasing distress. His hands were shaking. Helen Park, the elderly woman Kreshatar had met on his first train ride, noticed. "Are you all right, dear?" she asked gently. The young man looked up, tears in his eyes. "My father just died," he said, his voice cracking. "I just got the call. He had a heart attack. I need to get to the hospital, but I'm on the train and I can't. He started to cry right there in the crowded train car. What happened next shocked Kreshatar to his core. Helen immediately stood and put her arm around the young man, guiding him to her seat. Other passengers moved to give them more space. Someone offered tissues from their bag. Another person asked quietly if the young man needed anything, if there was anyone they could call for him. Gary, the mechanic, spoke to the young man in a low, calm voice. "Which hospital? St. Mary's? That's on the Green Line. We'll help you get there. Come on. We'll transfer at the next stop." 3 complete strangers got off the train with the grieving young man. Gary, Helen, and a woman Kreshatar had never seen before. They walked him to the platform for the Green Line, making sure he did not have to navigate his grief alone. Ben and Kreshatar watched through the window as the 4 of them stood together on the platform, the 3 strangers staying with the young man until his train arrived. "They did not know him," Kreshatar said quietly. "No," Ben agreed. "But that doesn't matter. He needed help. They helped." The moment stayed with Kreshatar. He thought about it that evening. He thought about it the next day during a boring trade meeting. He thought about it that night when he could not sleep again. His people flew alone through the void. They were strong, independent, powerful. They needed no one. But did that strength come at a cost? When a Zenthari was in pain, they dealt with it alone. When a Zenthari grieved, they grieved in isolation. There was pride in that independence, but there was something else in what he had witnessed on the train. Something his people did not have a word for. Community, he thought. The human word was community. The next morning, Kreshatar found himself on the 5 o'clock train again. Danny was there, as always, eating his breakfast sandwich. "Morning, Ambassador," Danny said cheerfully. "You're making this a habit." "Perhaps I am," Kreshatar replied. He sat on the floor of the train car, his massive frame taking up the space of several seats. But no one complained. Maria Lopez walked past and patted his shoulder in friendly greeting as she went to find a place to nap. George Patterson waved from across the car. The train pulled away from the station, carrying them all toward wherever they needed to go. Together. Always together. And for the first time in his long life, Ambassador Kreshatar of the Zenthari Collective did not feel like a dragon who could fly through stars. He felt like a passenger on a journey shared with others. He felt like he belonged. 8 months had passed since Kreshatar first arrived on New Haven. His official diplomatic mission had ended 3 months ago, but he had requested an extension. Then another extension. The Zenthari Council was growing impatient. But Kreshatar did not care. He had found something on this world that his people needed to see. Vreshkor had returned to Zenthar Prime after his evaluation visit. His report to the council had been carefully neutral, but he had included one line that surprised everyone. "Ambassador Kreshatar has not been compromised. He has been enlightened. I recommend the council listen to his proposal with open minds." Now Kreshatar sat in a small office building, accessible only by Hypertrain. He had requested this meeting weeks ago, and today it was finally happening. Across the desk sat Susan Park, the director of New Haven Transit Authority. She was 53 years old with gray streaks in her black hair and kind eyes that held both curiosity and confusion. "Ambassador," she said politely, "your message said you wanted to discuss a major project. How can the Transit Authority help you?" Kreshtar had rehearsed this moment many times in his mind. He had practiced the words, considered every angle. But now, sitting here, he decided to simply speak from his heart. "Director Park, I have spent 8 months riding your trains. I have watched your people travel together. I have seen rich and poor sharing the same seats. I have seen strangers help each other without being asked. I have witnessed something my people have never created in 10,000 years of civilization." Susan leaned forward, interested now. "What have you witnessed?" "Equality in motion," Kreshtar said. "On Zenthar Prime, we fly through space alone. Each of us relies only on ourselves. We think this makes us strong. But I have learned that strength can also come from traveling together. From building systems that serve everyone equally." He paused, gathering his courage. "I want to build a hypertrain system on my homeworld, and I want human engineers to help us do it." Susan Park sat back in her chair, her eyes wide. "You want to build a hypertrain on Zenthar Prime? Your people can fly through space naturally. Why would you need trains?" "Because flying alone is not the same as journeying together," Kreshtar said simply. "Because a society that only values individual strength will never know the strength that comes from community. Because I want my people to experience what I have experienced here. I want them to stand next to strangers and realize those strangers are neighbors. I want them to offer help without being asked. I want them to understand that the dream is not always to fly above everyone else, but sometimes to ride beside them." Susan was quiet for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was a smile of understanding. "This is going to cause quite a stir, Ambassador, both on your world and in the wider galaxy." "I know," Kreshtar said, "but it is necessary." The news spread fast. Within days, it was the top story on every human news network. The Zenthari, the proud space-flying dragons, were asking humans to teach them how to build trains. Some people thought it was wonderful. Others thought it was strange. A few thought it was insulting, as if the Zenthari were mocking human dependence on technology. But Kreshtar did not care about the opinions of strangers. He cared about the people he had met on the trains. He cared about Danny and Helen and George and Angela and Gary and Maria and Carla. He cared about the businessman who had paid extra for flowers, and the teenager with purple hair, and the young man who had grieved on a crowded train while strangers comforted him. The Zenthari Council debated for weeks. Some members called Kreshtar a fool. Others called him a visionary. In the end, they agreed to let him try. Perhaps out of curiosity. Perhaps because Vreshkor spoke passionately in support of the idea. Perhaps because deep down, some of them wondered if their isolation had become a prison rather than a source of pride. Susan Park assembled a team of 20 engineers and designers. They traveled to Zenthar Prime, the first humans to ever visit the Zenthari homeworld. What they found amazed them. A world of soaring crystal towers and vast open spaces. A world where individuals flew between destinations like birds, never touching the ground if they did not want to. It was beautiful. It was impressive. It was also deeply lonely. The human engineers worked alongside Zenthari technicians for 2 years. They built the first hypertrain line connecting the 3 largest cities on Zenthar Prime. They designed the trains to accommodate Zenthari bodies, making the cars larger and taller. They installed the magnetic levitation system and the power grid and all the hundreds of smaller systems that made a train network function. And finally, on a clear morning when both of Zenthar Prime's suns hung in a purple sky, the first train ran. Kreshatar stood on the platform with hundreds of other Zenthari. Most of them had come out of curiosity. Many were skeptical, some were openly hostile, seeing this as an insult to their heritage. The train arrived, sleek and silver, humming with controlled power. The doors opened. Kreshatar stepped inside. Behind him, hesitantly, other Zenthari followed. The car filled slowly. Zenthari were not used to being close to each other. Personal space was important to them. But the train had seats and standing room, and gradually people found their places. The doors closed. A chime sounded. The train began to move. It was strange at first. The Zenthari passengers stood rigid, uncomfortable with the proximity to others. They did not speak. They barely looked at each other. The silence in the car was heavy and awkward. But then something happened. A young Zenthari lost her balance as the train took a curve. An older Zenthari reached out automatically to steady her. Their eyes met. The older one nodded. The younger one bowed her head in thanks. It was a small moment, barely noticeable, but Kreshatar saw it and his heart soared. At the next station, more Zenthari boarded. The car grew more crowded. People shifted to make room. Someone helped another passenger with their bag. Two Zenthari struck up a hesitant conversation about the weather. By the third station, the silence had broken completely. Zenthari were talking to each other, not just to friends or family, but to strangers. They were asking about destinations. They were commenting on the smooth ride. They were experiencing something they had never experienced before: community. Kreshatar rode that first train from end to end, watching his people learn what he had learned, watching them discover that traveling together did not make them weak. It made them something else, something new. When the train finally returned to the starting station, Kreshatar stepped off onto the platform. A news crew waited there, cameras ready. The reporter, a young Zenthari female, approached him eagerly. "Ambassador Kreshatar, what do you say to those who claim this train system is a waste of resources? That the Zenthari have no need for such technology?" Kreshatar looked at the train behind him. Through the windows he could see Zenthari passengers still inside, some preparing to ride the line again, others just sitting and talking to new acquaintances. "I would say they are wrong," Kreshatar replied. "For 10,000 years we have flown alone through the stars. We have been proud. We have been strong. We have been independent. But we have also been lonely, though we did not have the wisdom to see it. This train does not replace our ability to fly. It gives us something we never had before. It gives us the choice to journey together." The reporter seemed surprised by his words. "Is that what you have learned from humans? To journey together?" "Yes," Kreshatar said. "And that the greatest dream is not always to soar above others, but sometimes to ride beside them, to share the path, to arrive together." 3 months later, the Hypertrain system on Zenthar Prime carried its 1 millionth passenger. Plans were already being made to expand the network to other cities. Other species across the galaxy watched with fascination and disbelief. The Zenthari, changing. The dragons, choosing to ride trains. Kreshatar took the morning train every day now. He had returned to Zenthar Prime permanently, his time as ambassador to New Haven complete. But he carried the lessons of Earth with him. This morning, like every morning, he stood in a crowded train car surrounded by other Zenthari. A child pulled on her father's hand, excited by the journey. An elderly Zenthari dozed in his seat. 2 students discussed their classes in low voices. The train hummed along its magnetic rails, carrying them all toward whatever destinations awaited. Together, always together. And Kreshatar, the dragon who had learned to dream a different dream, smiled. He was home.